How do we make sure that this doesn't become an HR exercise or a certain perk, right? It's not about being perk. It's not about being nice. It is really about the core and the DNA of how things need to be done in a company.
Noa Perry Reifer is Chief People Officer at Neko Health, a Swedish health tech company co-founded by Spotify's Daniel Ek. Neko is on a mission to shift healthcare from treating illness to preventing it, using advanced body scanning and AI. Noa joined Neko just after the 100-person mark, the exact same stage where just a few years earlier she joined On, the Swiss company she helped scale from a niche running brand to a global IPO, all while protecting a strong entrepreneurial culture. But this time the rules are different. At Neko, she's not just scaling culture, she's designing it in a world where AI is already shaping how teams work, how leadership shows up, and how trust gets built. We talk about what she's doing differently this time, but also what she's carrying over from On, and how founders can build cultures that actually work in the age of AI. Let's get into it.
Noa, welcome back to the show. So when we last spoke, you said there were things On's team wanted to preserve no matter what, but that culture should also evolve and grow. Looking back now, what are the key lessons or cultural principles from On that you've carried over to Neko? And what are things you maybe consciously left behind?
Yeah, thank you. And very nice to be here. Again, thank you for inviting me. I think when it comes to culture, what is very clear to me is that every company has a different culture, has different values, different behaviors. But what is very, very important is to ensure that this culture is extremely distinct to the company. So if you end up in a situation where you look at your culture, whether it's a culture doc or a list of behaviors, and you say, hey, I could actually apply it in a different company and it is going to be the same, then you did not create that common language that is so important. So to me, if you are new to a company or you're even in a company for 10 years, asking yourself the question, how much is the culture distinct and how much does it really become that common language that no other company or no other body can take and embed, then you know that you have a strong culture. And in order to make that even stronger, talking about it once or talking about it twice will not move the needle. So it is something that leaders and founders and every individual in the company has to ensure that this is talked about every day in every situation. And with that, there needs to come a lot of intentionality. Because if you're not intentional about that, you would not put that front and center. So these are just a few of the learnings that I hope I'm taking forward into my new role.
And at On, you joined the company when it was just at the 100-person mark, and now at Neko, you stepped in at a similar stage. What's different this time? Because it is kind of the same mark in terms of persons, right? But it's a very different time also in terms of technology. What are you doing the same? And where are you deliberately choosing a different playbook?
Yeah. So I love this stage of companies, and this is also one of the reasons that I decided to join Neko. It is funny. It's almost like for the listeners who have children, it's almost like having your second child and then realizing, oh, like, yes, it came from maybe similar parents but like it is so different. So this is a bit the stage that I'm at. I would say, again, if you take the analogy of kids, like the first kid, you make, so many mistakes, right? And then you tell yourself, hey, with the second child, I'm not going to make these mistakes. And you end up making different mistakes because sometimes you really need to experience it yourself in order to correct. So I would say I made a lot of mistakes at On that I learned from, and I'm trying to not make them at Neko. But at the same time, I know that as part of my learning journey and everyone's learning journey, it will not be mistakes free. So I think more specifically, I'm paying a lot of attention to how I am building my own team and what is the level that I need to bring from day one. So this would be one good example. The other part is really the relationships that I built you almost take them for granted when you leave a company after so many years, where you feel, hey, the relationships are, it's your best friends, or it's almost like a family. And then you come into a new company and you understand, hey, I need to invest in it a lot, because it is not going to come naturally if I don't invest in it. So I would say that is another key component. And then you've mentioned kind of technology and tooling there as well, trying to think about what Neko is going to need, not tomorrow, and I would say not even in a year from now, but really thinking big, so you don't make the mistakes of implementing a tool or following a certain way of working that actually in a year from now you will need to completely unpack and start from scratch. And sometimes there is no other way and you need to do that. But many times, if you were to optimize for what you would need in 2 or 3 years from now, that would be a smart way to avoid unnecessary change of processes.
Do you have any, maybe on this particular part, do you have any tips for listeners out there who really want to be intentional about building something for the long run, and also thinking for their specific team about how does this team, or how does the structure I want to build up have to be in 1, 2, or 5 years? Do you have any tips that they have the headspace to do that? Because I can also imagine, right, given the 100-person mark, things are kind of all over the place, and you probably have to run around from A to B, extinguishing a lot of fires. So how do you find headspace, or what's your at least best advice you have, given that maybe you never find the headspace you truly want, right?
Yeah. I think I would say that there are a few things in leaders' approach that if they are very aware of that, probably they can optimize for really thinking about the future ahead or the next phase of the company. One of them is legacy. I think there is a lot of legacy in companies, and legacy is beautiful for storytelling and understanding the DNA and understanding where things came from. So it serves an important element, but legacy is not going to help when building the future. So asking yourself, why are you doing certain things? And asking yourself, is it because it is the best thing for our next phase, or is it because it is part of our legacy as a company? That is an important question that I think would lead for the prioritization of the next phase. The other part that I'm encouraging my team currently is, a lot of companies say, think big, right? So like I would say, yes, think big, but also be bold, right? Because if are not bold enough, what you're going to end up having is doing, you could call it baby steps or incremental steps, and it is not always needed. Sometimes you need incremental baby steps, absolutely. But in many, many cases, actually, if you are bold enough, you're going to get to the right solution that would be a better fit for the future. So I think these elements are just extremely important for companies who are in that fast pace. And it's funny, you've mentioned 100 people. Neko already, and I've only been at Neko for 5 months, because we have a tech organization, but we also have a medical team, right? We have doctors, we have nurses. We are now beyond the 500. Right? So we cannot stop, and we cannot consider ourselves a 100 people company, because we're not. And this is why it requires us to really think about the next phase and to not wait.
Yeah. Well, one question. Can you share an example where you had to decide between an incremental step or a very bold step, be it here at Neko or at On or somewhere else, just to give an example of what this could look like?
Yeah, so I would say one example could be organizational changes. So many times companies build a certain structure that fits for where they are right now. And then when they look ahead, they know, oh, this structure is not going to lead us to where we need to be. And then there are a number of options. One option is to make incremental steps. So to say, hey, I'm dealing with this team. So take the finance team, I'm making the changes there. And then maybe in 6 months from now, I will go and deal with the marketing team. And it is totally understandable why companies try to do that, right? Perhaps they don't want to have too much change in the company, right? And again, going back to legacy, I think taking a bold approach there, which is again something that we've done as well, would probably lead to a faster result, but not only a faster result, a high quality and better result for the future. So I would say that's one example. And then the other example probably is with systems and with tooling. So again, in my own world, you would think about HRIS or talent acquisition systems. So the first thing when you start talking to vendors, they would ask you, how many people are you in the company right now, right? And then they say, okay, yeah, this tool is only for 1,000 and above, or this tool is only for 2,000 and above. But you're not, right? So you end up choosing a different tool. But until you implemented the tool, you're already too big for that tool. So you probably spent, money, energy, and time on a solution that would not serve you well. So I think these are just a number of examples that are extremely important.
For the listeners out there who are starting from scratch and currently building from zero and also need to build a culture from zero, so what is the first thing that you need to design? Language, behavior, structure, something else? What would you say?
At the end, the culture is a representation of how you want things to be done in a certain company, right? And it should serve as a common language that people can always refer to when they are asking themselves how to do certain things. So you have a mission, right? You know where you want to get to. So your car has the navigation and knows where they want to get to. But if you don't have the engine, the car is not going to move anywhere. So I think the real question should be how to tie it into that mission, right? The mission is where you want to get to, but the culture needs to support you in getting there. So it is very important to be clear on the mission and what it is that you're trying to achieve as a company. And then start thinking about, again, how to create a common language. And I think common language, I know I'm saying it again and again, but it doesn't matter. You can call it values. You can call it, there are different ways of calling it. But at the end, what you're creating is that common language, right? So starting to think about a distinct common language and a common language that is also authentic, whether it's to the founders or to the team as a whole, and can apply to the entire company. And I think that's another important thing, especially for companies like Neko, who are really reinventing a category, right? And by reinventing a category, we have top AI engineers that work at Neko. We also have doctors or nurses that work in shifts, right? And then they don't come every day in front of their, laptop, right? They come and they see our members. So very, very different ways of working, right? And if we create a culture that only applies to our doctors, or if we create a culture that only applies for our engineers, we will not have a common language. And what we're going to start having is these subcultures. And what these subcultures do is separate the company. And then if you go back to the mission, you fail, because your mission is actually, again, in the Neko world, having that beautiful combination of what we're trying to do, which is technology together with the medical care.
And on that point, sometimes I think some people often say, this mission and language, that is all just, people speak, right? But it comes down to these problems. But the thing is, I think often in real life, you have very small problems in daily life, but they kind of accumulate. And then if you don't know why you're doing this for, and you have an identity, right, a common language, it's just super hard to deal with these problems, right? And vice versa. It's very easy to deal with these problems when you have an identity and you know what you're doing this for. So it's extremely relevant.
Yeah. I think it's a very good point, because you've also mentioned, like, that culture and values can be viewed as that people thing, right? And to be honest, I want to be the person in the company that probably speaks the least about culture, right? If I'm the person that pushes it all the time, then again, the culture is not going to be something that really sticks or something that is really strong. So I guess if there are founders who are listening to us, or even people leaders, HR leaders, how do we make sure that this doesn't become an HR exercise or a certain perk, right? It's not about being it's not about a perk. It's not about being nice. It is really about the core and the DNA of how things need to be done in a company.
One last question on your also personal experience now, jumping into this new environment and then already scaling up within not even 6 months from 100 to over 500 people. How did you practically approach now your last couple of months at Neko and in this new role?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I would say the challenge is that you want to take time and learn and meet people and kind of be an observer. And at the same time, you understand that, hey, you need to really act and you really need to put things in motion, because there is no time, right, to wait. So what I was trying to do, and again, not always successfully, is to balance between both. So balance between my curiosity and my learning to making decisions from day one, even though I might not have all the information and all the details. And I think it's interesting if we think about how we are wired, especially after you worked in bigger company. Many times when you ask yourself, hey, do I really need 3 months to implement something? Or do I really need 6 months to make a decision? The answer is you can actually speed it up. So what I was trying to do is be that curious person that invests in relationships, learns about the business, learns about the priorities, learns about the challenges, and at the same time already acting and making some changes. And that might not be the right approach for all companies, by the way. So there could be some companies where, you really need to do nothing in the first 6 months. But even then, I would always try and challenge it, because I think we're wired towards maybe waiting or prolonging certain elements for a bit too long.
Now, switching a little bit the topic, in a recent LinkedIn post, you wrote that building Neko Health in the AI area has made one thing very clear: you can either wait or lead proactively. So maybe let's talk a little bit about what leading proactively looks like in practice. You talk about this dual mode talent, so people fluent in both AI speed and human judgment. What are you doing differently in hiring to identify, to grow this kind of talent?
Yeah, so I think on the whole AI era and what companies need to do different, I would say, of course, a very hot topic that I know both of you are, leading the way in many different aspects. And the reality is that we are all very much in the unknown, right? And there are some stuff that we already feel that is happening in companies, and there are a lot of stuff that we envision. And then people say, hey, that will start in a year from now. And then there are some people who say, hey, it will take 5 years. And then there are a few who says, hey, there won't be any change. And I would say that for me, the proactivity is to test things and to try things, because you can wait and see what happens, or you can start testing and seeing whether you could actually benefit from approaching things a little bit differently. And in terms of that dual mode mastery, at the end, what it means is that people need to be able to think in two ways. They need to be able to use AI, but what many people are not talking about is also they need to be able to know when to override AI. And if you think about, people's job in a 100% mode, maybe the AI can do 80%, which is amazing. But what sometimes really matters is that 20%. And what is that 20%? The 20% is the human judgment or the creativity or leadership, right? These are things that no AI tool can absolutely do in the way that that we would benefit from. So then you start seeing people that are AI native, but then what could happen is that then it is an 80% out, right? And that is not good, right? That would not lead to the quality that companies need. Or then you have the people that maybe are not AI native, so they continue to rely too little on what the AI can do. And then they're not optimizing for their magic as human beings. And this is why that dual mastery is just so important, both the AI, but also the human. And I know sometimes it's a polarity, but when you start thinking about leadership, and what you end up seeing is that the best leaders are those who can live in both worlds that sometimes are very much contradicting, right? And this is why it's so important. I would say you asked specifically on hiring. So I would say this whole dual mastery can really shift and change how companies hire or what they hire for. Because if you think about engineering, maybe you don't need to be the best at coding, but what you really need to be the best at is to challenge the code and to have your judgment on what the code is or the quality of it and what you would change. So how do you shift the way you assess individuals based on that? So all of these elements are super important for companies. And again, we don't know the answer because it could be that everything that I just spoke about is wrong. But how do you allow yourself to test that and to pilot that and to see what you gain from it would be key.
And staying on hiring for a second, more startups are starting to use AI in the actual selection process. So resume screening, assessments, even interviews. Some see it as a way to move faster and reduce bias. Others worry about fairness and transparency. How do you think about using AI in hiring? Is it something you're experimenting with? And also, if yes, what would responsible AI hiring look like in practice?
Yeah, so I would say we definitely want to experiment more. We're not there yet, but I think experimenting is probably a very good word for that because, again, it goes back to trying and to piloting. And it's one of these things, and you said it very well, everyone has opinions on, right? You cannot use AI for hiring. You have to use AI for hiring. And a lot of these are great opinions. But then what is the truth and what is the reality? So examples could be looking at certain steps that you have within the hiring process. So whether, as an example, it could be your first screening, or it could even be something towards the end, like background checks. And then testing it out and seeing, hey, what does the human part add or not add if you replace it by AI, right? And then you end up looking at it and saying, hey, the filtering that is being done or the judgment that is being done by an AI tool is identical or almost identical to humans. And then you understand, hey, this is probably an area where you could absolutely leverage AI. But there are going to be other areas, again, that the human judgment is not going to be replaceable. So it is not either or, again. And I think this is where us as leaders really need to show up and explain that when we say, hey, recruiting can be done by AI, yeah, there are some elements, but not all elements. And the magic is to really find where and what you leverage within our different tools.
Absolutely. And in the same LinkedIn post that I quoted, you also said culture is the accelerator. Tools are everywhere, but without the right culture, transformation stalls. How do you embed culture directly into the daily operating system, not just values, but actual workflows when it comes to this topic?
Yeah, sure. And I think one of the elements where, I've mentioned around culture as an accelerator is a lot of companies probably try now to become more AI native, right? And especially for companies that were not born in an AI native era, probably one of the steps that are potentially missing is asking, what does that mean for the culture? Because if ways of working need to absolutely change in certain companies that have been around for 50 years or 100 years, I'm pretty sure that if they open up their culture doc or their values, they would probably see that there needs to be a certain adaptation as well. That adaptation will accelerate the usage of the new tooling or new ways of working. And this is where the link and the combination is so important. And to give maybe practical examples. So every company, for the good or for the bad, has a certain way to measure performance or to do feedback or to do promotions, all of these type of things, right? And these elements are strongly linked to culture, or should be strongly linked to culture. But in the AI world, probably the way you measure performance, right? And the way and what you see as important for people to be able to contribute is going to be different. So if you don't change that, people will never understand the change that they need to do in order to maximize their performance within a certain company. And this is really the links. In terms of ways of working and actual workflows, culture should be a very strong contributor to how you measure performance, but also a very strong contributor to how you even establish goals for the company, right? I can give you specific examples. At Neko, we talk a lot about, from a culture perspective, we talk a lot about chase 10x and not 10%, right? Because we are not here to tweak healthcare, right? We're here to really transform it. So if we stay within the 10%, we will not be able to transform it, right? We will not be able to achieve what we're here for. So that means that as individuals, but also on a company level, the whole goal setting exercise needs to be wired towards that 10x and not that 10%. So this is just an example of one connection, but I'm sure there are many, many more.
And in this whole new era, so to say, I mean, you don't need to change everything, especially when you have been a company for a longer time. What's maybe one part of your org or team design that might sound unusual to traditional people leaders, but is proving crucial in this new hybrid era?
I think it's very true that you don't need to change everything. And a lot of, when people talk about AI, the fear many times is like it becomes less human, right? And it becomes like leadership doesn't matter so much. So I would actually say that leadership and the human side matters even more, right? Because this is something that no AI or technology can replace. So even in recruiting processes, how do you really test for the leadership and for the human side of different roles is actually extremely important. But to your question on kind of team, company structure or team design, if I try to put my future glasses on, I would say that hopefully we get to a situation where, first of all, teams are smaller and teams are flatter, which means that there are probably less levels within a certain team, and there are actually more experienced people in teams versus what we are used to, which is this pyramid of people that are, a lot of people that are not experienced, and then just, very few that are experienced. I want to be very careful when I use the word experienced, and I was debating whether to use experienced or to use senior, because what I mean by that is not the years of experience that you have in your resume or how big of teams you led, but really that ability to lead, to have a strong sense of judgment, right? And to challenge the status quo and bring that human creativity. And sometimes you see people that can do all of it and they only have 2 years of experience, right? So, but again, like that pyramid will probably be way flatter in this new era. And maybe then another thing that I personally really believe in, and we've done a lot of that at On, and I believe that we can do now even more in this era, is how do we think about industry outsiders? So how can we bring people that have never worked in that specific industry or even come from very different environments or even different functions and bring them into a role that they haven't done before? And I think we have a great opportunity of doing more of that because of the technology that we currently have, and because the technology can almost fill in some of the gaps that maybe people don't have because of their experience. So this is another important element. And then if I put my glasses again, but think even further ahead, and a lot of companies now are designing bots, right? So there is a people bot, a legal bot, a finance bot, and this is great. One of the elements to think about, how do these bots become part of the team? And how do these bots become part of the company? And then it goes back to culture, right? If as an employee now, I'm speaking more and more to bots when I have some questions, then you almost need to think, how do you embed culture and values within bots and not only within humans? And I know that's kind of a big step ahead to what we're thinking about, but also very important.
We spoke earlier about how Neko has a very diverse skill set they are looking for in their staff, because you're not only running a classic tech org, you also have medical teams, right? And you have staff on the ground across Europe. So basically, on the one hand, medical teams, on the other hand, a classic tech org. How do you bring this all together that it doesn't rip apart?
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I've been spending a lot of time on trying to answer this question over the last 5 months. And I think, again, going back to that culture setting and creating that distinct culture, that culture has to be relevant for all of the different teams, right? And this is very important. Otherwise, you will create these subcultures that we talked about. The application of certain values can and probably should be different between these different teams. So what is very important is to take that core and that DNA and then to have non-stop conversations with the different teams on what does that mean for them. I gave that Chase 10X earlier as an example. We believe that chasing 10X is relevant to everyone. But of course, chasing 10X as part of being in our engineering team, or as part of being in our marketing team, or as part of being in our medical team is probably going to look different. We can only give some examples, but the real work comes from the conversations that we are having with the different teams and workshopping it with them and creating these stories that people really understand what it means to them in their day-to-day job. And then you start having that as a common language, because then I can come and tell my team member, hey, I really, really saw that you chased 10X here, right? And then it becomes very, very clear. So again, the overall arching framework really has to fit everybody, but the application and the actual specific behaviors and examples need to be different. Otherwise, it's not going to stick.
We're already almost at the end, but we want to end this really, really insightful session with some rapid fire questions. So I'll just ask the question and then you're open to just quickly share what comes to your mind. So the first one is, what's one belief about company culture you've completely changed your mind about in the past year?
Yeah, so I think going back to my example about second child, I probably did not realize enough how different companies are, and therefore how different culture can be and should be. So sometimes you think, hey, company at the early stage, 100 people here, 100 people here, probably the needs are pretty similar. But the beauty, and that's why it's so exciting for me, is that it is totally different. So knowing that, especially for people who are moving into a new job, into a new environment.
What's one traditional HR or people practice you've abandoned and never looked back?
So maybe it's not a people practice, but it relates to a lot of people practices. And for those who are part of my team, they probably would laugh now, is the word process, right? I try to limit as much as possible the add-ons of processes. And I know it is impossible to have zero processes, but at the end, you really need to ask yourself, in the people side of the business, but maybe in other parts as well, is that process really necessary? Many times processes come in because there is a lack of trust. Right? And then you need a process because you need to somehow monitor. So I think that if companies and if people teams really try to limit the amount of processes to really where it is absolutely necessary, then topics that are just so important for human interactions, like trust and relationship and leadership, will automatically be at a completely different level.
And last question, if every founder or people leader listening could do just one thing this week to future-proof their culture, what should it be?
It could be a bit cliche, but I actually really believe in is asking themselves every morning, what are they doing as leaders and as coaches versus as individuals or as founders. I believe that the leadership component of every founder has to be absolute top of mind, no matter where they are in the journey. And that means how they think about onboarding new people to the team and their investment in that, how they think about supporting people, but also challenging them and having that, again, almost something that can be a polarity, but actually you need to have both. How they convey and inspire people in their, towards the mission and towards what they're trying to achieve or we're trying to achieve. So again, building that leadership muscle is something that is so critical for every founder and is not easy as well.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. If now people want to reach out to you or rather learn more about Neko, where do they find the information they need?
So they're very welcome to reach out on LinkedIn. I will do my best to answer and also maybe connect to some people from the team. So very happy to continue the conversation and always enjoy being here with both of you. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Noa, and see you soon.
See you.
And now we would love to hear from you. How did you like it? What should we improve? Do you have any suggestions, ideas, or dream podcast guests? Please let us know.
Thank you and see you again next week.